G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. ABC Radio National is about to replay a background briefing program into the threat currently posed to Australian society by right-wing, white supremacist, fascist, terrorist organisations. Why don't we have a look at that, eh?
A background briefing investigation has revealed that far-right extremists currently account for 1/3 of all onshore investigations by Australia's domestic spy agency. ASIO's warned that far-right extremists are seeking to exploit the coronavirus pandemic to attract new followers and to spread their ideas. It comes as human rights experts are calling for greater action by the federal government to prevent racism and to stop dangerous groups from exploiting the pandemic for their agendas. Mario Christodoulou reports.
The ladies in the back gate, they get an A+. In the media, they're feeding you lies. Lots of lives are dying.
Hyde Park, Sydney, 2 weeks ago. Around 400 people are jeering and shouting. A middle-aged man with a bullhorn standing under a towering fig tree warns the crowd about the dangers of 5G.
They want you to buy or use 5G, and with the flick of a button, it can become a weapon.
Standing not far away is a man with greying hair. He's geeing up an overhyped crowd and railing against vaccinations.
We do not consent in any way to the draconian mandatory vaccination policies that have already introduced into our children.
Mums with designer bags push strollers, dreadlock hippies strum guitars, and nearby a guy in camo gear stands like a bouncer at a nightclub surveying the crowd through tinted glasses. Question everything is written across his chest in Texter.
A lot of influential people or a lot of people in power throughout the world have the same goal that they're sort of trying to adhere towards.
The people here represent a collection of disparate movements, linked by one thing, their distrust of authority. And as the world is overcome with the pandemic and whole populations are forced into lockdown, these people have been searching for someone to blame. The government, doctors, or maybe even the Chinese. On the fringes of the rally, on a small sunlit patch of grass, a group of 4 people hold up large placards that read, "Stop the Chinese invasion," and "Immigration is the elephant in the room."
Too many people here in Australia, we must wake them up. We have to wake them up. Okay?
Among the grab bag of disparate causes represented at today's rally, it's the groups spouting anti-China slogans that are increasingly drawing the eye of Australia's security agencies. Since the lockdown, there's been a spike in reports of racist attacks against not just Chinese, but anyone who might just happen to look Asian across the country. At a time when even the most banal of our everyday activities is changing or gone altogether, security agencies are warning that far-right groups are taking advantage. They're exploiting anti-establishment and latent anti-China sentiment to further their own radical agendas. And what I'm seeing here at this rally is an opening for those extremist groups to dive right into.
So bubble tea is it's like a very popular Taiwanese dessert almost. It has like tapioca pearls in it usually. That's the one that I get anyway.
Rosa has been at the pointy end of coronavirus anger. She lives in Marrickville in Sydney's inner west. When I first see her, she's walking towards me engrossed in her phone, wearing this baggy grey jumper. And another thing you need to know about her, she loves bubble tea.
It is so sugary and probably not good for you, but it is so delicious.
And it so happens there's this awesome bubble tea shop just down the road from where she lives on the main street.
Yeah, we go there so often.
It's a Monday afternoon and Rosa and her older sister Sophie are getting stuck into some Uber Eats when one of them gets a hankering for some bubble tea. They're walking along when 2 girls waltz up behind them. One is wearing a black hoodie and another is wearing a grey sweatsuit.
So obviously I looked over at them only because they were being a little bit noisy. But then they walk past us, and then they look at us both in the eye, and they say, oh, like, stay away from them, they've got the coronavirus. So keep your distance and stuff.
Now, the thing to know about Rosa is she doesn't play the victim well. She grew up in Marrickville. She's not even Chinese. She's first-generation Australian, and her parents were born in Vietnam. She's tough, and she's not about to let that sort of insult lie.
So I said, excuse me, what the fuck did you just say? I definitely just couldn't stand the thought of her walking away and completely getting away with it. I call out in like pure anger, excuse me, what did you just say? Like, say it again. And that's when I pulled out my camera, and that's when she got a bit more aggressive. You wanna fuck around here? You fucking little Asian dog? Yeah! The girl in the grey started charging towards me. And she was like, you know, do you want to have a fucking go? Yelling at me, calling me like an Asian dog, an Asian slut, an Asian whore, like everything. It had everything to do with my race. But she did say, I've got a knife on me, like, do you want to have a go? Like, you're messing with a crazy bitch. Yeah! Get the fuck out of here now! Get the fuck!
People notice something's wrong. They peer out their windows and watch the spectacle. Rosa's attacker jumps around her, spits at her, tries to kick her, and swears while calling her Asian this and Asian that.
I was shit scared. I've never even been in a physical altercation in my life before, you know.
After a few minutes, a bystander in shorts and thongs walks over, raises his arms, and the attacker walks off. Rosa is a mess.
My legs were shaking. I couldn't speak properly because I was crying.
She's never experienced anything like this before. Attacked because she looks Asian.
Like, I literally couldn't even, like, utter words because I was crying so much and I was, like, hyperventilating. Yeah, I was shaking. I was sweating. Like, it was really, really bad. And it took me a couple of hours to calm down.
So I've sort of logged into my computer.
Osman Chu, a researcher at Per Capita, a progressive think tank, wants to show me something.
I'm looking for some of the results that we've gotten from our online tracker.
In April, along with a group called the Asian Australian Alliance, he put a call out. Have you experienced racism? Tell us about it.
It was hard to know exactly how many people would respond, but the response has been quite overwhelming.
He was shocked by the responses that came in.
So just one that jumps out, this person who was just taking some public transport in Perth. So they wrote, I was walking past Perth City. This couple shouted at me, go back to China. They also boarded the bus and started shouting at me, go back to China, with some F words.
Australia has a long history of Asian discrimination and racism, from the gold rush in the mid-19th century to the rise of Pauline Hanson and One Nation in the 90s. Now, with the coronavirus, Osman says it's flaring up again, and people's pent-up frustration is being taken out on anyone that looks even remotely Asian.
COVID-19 almost gave people an outlet to say things they were feeling. It didn't feel like they were able to.
The youngest victim in Osman's database is 15. The oldest is 93.
So as I was walking through the health section, the man, he was standing opposite.
I see these two Caucasian people.
And then I heard him whisper pretty loudly, I think she's got corona. I feel scared and really awful.
And they yelled, hey, coronavirus. And then they said that we were the cause of the virus. And then they just walked away, just laughing. Like, it was such a funny joke.
We started chanting, corona, corona, corona.
I kind of just clenched the driving wheel. I just clenched it really hard.
I was thinking, like, did that just happen?
At last check, Osman had received around 400 stories like those. More than 200 were from when the person was walking down the street or at a supermarket. But this is one survey by one group, and no one really knows what the exact numbers are. only about 10% of these victims reported their attacks to the police. If I want good and comprehensive numbers on the level of racism out there in the community across Australia, where do I get them from?
Unfortunately, they don't really exist. So there is no cohesive data collection that brings together, data from police, relevant state anti-discrimination boards, the Human Rights Commission, and other parts of government into some kind of comparable format.
And that's a problem, but it's not exactly a new one.
Hey there, Alice Brennan here. Welcome to Background Briefing.
In fact, we covered it last year on the show, but it was about another type of racism, Islamophobia. At the time, we spoke to former Race Discrimination Commissioner Tim Sopomosan.
Let's be very clear, there is a real threat of hate crime. Because we're not collecting data on that, however, we are statistically blind to that phenomenon.
It's been a year since we did that story, and since then the world has, let's say, changed somewhat. So I went back to Tim Sopomosan and asked him, has anything moved on reporting hate crime?
Nothing has fundamentally changed.
Tim Sopomosan says, in fact, the only thing that has changed is that more hate crime seems to be happening.
We do know that there has been an increase in people's experience of racial prejudice and racial hatred, but there's no comprehensive mechanism for capturing people's experiences across the country. Anti-Asian and anti-Chinese racism just hasn't occurred overnight. What we've seen, though, is a supercharging of anxieties and fears as a result of the coronavirus.
So why is it a problem if we're not keeping track of this rise in racist crimes? Matteo?
Yes.
Matteo Vigani is an expert in countering militant extremism and hate crimes in Australia. He says there's a lack of data about incidents of hate speech, hate crimes, and racist abuse, and this makes it harder to track how online bigotry becomes real-life violence.
So the question is, when does a death threat online, when does a severe case of hate speech online translate into offline violence? So we can see anecdotally that there are cases in which lower severity incidents are connected with higher severity incidents of hatred and even violent extremism.
And according to Matteo, COVID-19 has meant scores of Australians are being exposed to extremist ideas and propaganda.
We are all stuck at home with higher anxiety and anger, and we are all vulnerable to misinformation when we look for certainties online. So, for example, we are all vulnerable to extremist groups spreading conspiracy theories to scapegoat certain outgroups, like Chinese people, as we've seen in recent examples.
And what's worse, fears Matteo, is that there are extremists poised to take advantage.
Extremist groups always try to exploit what happens in the context to increase their power and to recruit new people.
But is this actually happening? Andy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
If extremist groups and individuals are trying to capitalize on coronavirus, this guy will know all about it.
I'm comfortable with being referred to as Andy Fleming,
but most just know him by his online persona, Slack Bastard. Do you mind my asking how you came up with the name Slack Bastard?
Well, many years ago when I was thinking about starting a blog, I was wondering what I should call it. And I asked one of my friends if they had any suggestions. And that's what they suggested.
But the joke is, he isn't slack at all. Andy Fleming is an active anti-fascist researcher who exposes extreme right-wing networks online. He's been the subject of death threats, and he's only able to do his work behind a thin veil of anonymity.
It was the case that a man in Victoria was convicted last year, or sentenced, also for planning to engage in murderous activity directed at people like myself.
Andy Fleming has been watching as frustration at coronavirus has swelled online. In burgeoning chat groups dominated by corona conspiracies and anti-China sentiment, Andy has noticed other actors circling at the edges, trying to influence the debate.
So among the people who are organising rallies to denounce the lockdown and so on, if you examine their pages and groups, many are not of the extreme right. But in those conversations, you'll see attempts to influence them. And what they're also drawing upon is a broader conspiratorial mindset, which maintains that there are shadowy actors that need to be exposed.
These are the extremists using coronavirus as cover to spread their message and recruit. One example he refers us to is a post from a popular COVID-19 conspiracy chat group. It reads,
"The chinks are bold enough to lie to the world about their case numbers, so I'm sure they're bold enough to scam Europeans with their cheaply made junk test kits like the yellow Jews are."
It's racist and offensive. But what's more worrying is the outfit behind it. A link at the bottom takes you to a white supremacist forum where violent extremism is promoted in post after post. The top of this page tells visitors, quote, "Anti-Chinese sentiment grows day by day." It's not just online. Now it's spilling into the real world.
Flying high over town, this is what Kyabran locals woke to. A large swastika planted at the top of a phone tower.
It's impossible to miss the large flag flapping in the breeze. But it isn't just the Nazi flag. There are two other flags hanging alongside it.
Two Chinese flags were also put on display. All three feature the words COVID-19.
Around the same time, in Brisbane,
give me a thumbs up when you press play.
A group of black-shirted men are setting up a camera. They're at the front of the city's town hall, and one of them's wearing a Make Australia Great Again hat.
We just got COVID-19s going havoc around the world.
These are the Proud Boys, an Australian offshoot of a violent American organisation whose members describe themselves as Western chauvinists and who believe that Western culture is inherently superior.
This is a message about COVID-19 being made in China.
The camera turns, revealing a roughly 2-metre-high banner upon which is written in block lettering, COVID-19, made in China. We reached out to the Proud Boys and they told us that this wasn't a racist poster and was instead directed at the Chinese government. They said they were making a political statement and that they are not racists. Then, in Perth, about a week later, more banners carrying anti-China slogans appeared. One read, "China lied, people died, no place left to hide." Photos of the banners were soon posted on a white supremacist discussion board online, with the comment,
"Western Australia Chads are making chink virus propaganda."
Anti-China propaganda is one thing, but I found a group whose members are taking that sentiment in a dangerous new direction. What you're hearing is a video from the website of a New Zealand white supremacist movement. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to advertise them. The video is titled "Stand Against Chinese Influence," and on screen are black hooded figures late at night pasting up posters. One poster reads, "Boycott China." Another has a picture of the coronavirus and says, "Don't let it happen again." The posters are stuck on the windows of supermarkets, electronics stores, department stores. Matt is one member of this group. Now, Matt is an online identity. He was followed and tracked online by the anti-fascist group, the White Rose Society, and New Zealand-based group Paparoa, who infiltrated secret encrypted chat groups to expose his actions. One of those chat groups focuses on white supremacist causes, including discussion of the so-called upcoming race war. And, if I forgot to mention it, that isn't a New Zealand chat group. It's an Australian one. Elsewhere online, Matt discusses how to further the white supremacist cause, as well as buying guns illegally.
"I'm going to have to go to the black market. I don't want to have to buy off gangs if I don't have to."
He also spoke about how to hide from authorities.
Are we at the point where what we have to do has to be completely decentralized and organized within independent 3 to 5 man cells?
And he also reached out to extremist groups overseas, including the Base, a neo-Nazi paramilitary group in the US.
I just want to send a message of support and prayer from New Zealand to the base.
And earlier this year, he says he was in Sydney.
I was at Sydney Airport the other day and all the staff had masks and heaps of people walking around with masks. I avoided all the gooks.
We contacted the organisation and asked about Matt's actions. We were told claims against Matt were a total fabrication and that no charges had been brought against him.
The accusations are flat out fabricated to smear our group.
The White Rose Society in Paparoa say this group has been using anti-China racism during COVID-19.
They provide an environment where people can be radicalised towards neo-fascism, which could lead to some of them engaging in violent acts up to and including Christchurch-style massacres, just as the Christchurch shooter had been radicalised.
As I keep trawling through the social media posts of far-right activists, a flyer for an event catches my eye. It's for a rally called Wake Up Australia, and it's being held in central Sydney. The accompanying post pushes people to come along and to protest, quote, China's bully boy behaviour against Australia, a nation that has infected the world with the China virus. The guy who posted it? It's Nick Folkes. Never heard of Nick Folkes? Well, he's a notorious extreme right-wing provocateur with a long history of public stunts and propaganda denigrating Muslims, homosexuals, refugees, Africans, and Asians. For example, in October 2014, he tried to enter Parliament House in Canberra to protest against the wearing of the burqa, flanked by a supporter in a Ku Klux Klan outfit.
Headdress is going to come up.
Pointy hat.
Yes, your pointy hat.
In May 2015, he orchestrated a massive leaflet drop in Sydney claiming the Chinese were invading Australia.
We're sick and tired of Australia being invaded by foreigners, especially Chinese.
And the following year, he barged into a Sunday sermon at the Gosford Anglican Church, dressed in mock Islamic garb, armed with a loudspeaker and protesting against multiculturalism.
Islam is here to take over Australia. This is the future that you voted for, that you asked for.
The local priest said his parishioners were terrified.
Well, I realised what was happening, but a lot of the parishioners didn't, so they were quite concerned and quite traumatised by the event. We had to spend a lot of time yesterday sort of pastorally caring for some of the people who were shocked by this incident.
Folks later justified the move this way.
I strongly believe that all culture is not equal. We've got to promote our dominant culture in Australia.
Then, in April this year, when fears were growing about the spread of coronavirus in Australia, Folkes posted this video to his social media accounts.
Wake up, Australia! Wake up, Australia! No more shit from China!
That sound you can hear is the crack of a stock whip, and it's being held by a man in a cowboy hat standing just outside the Chinese consulate in Sydney.
Filthy fucking commies!
He's shouting at an orderly line of people waiting to go into the building.
We'll get you, fuckers! Spread that filthy fucking disease worldwide!
The 55-year-old wielding the whip was eventually caught by police and charged, but not before his video was viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Underneath the video, Folkes writes,
The bloke reflects everything I love about forgotten Australia. He doesn't give a fuck about political correctness in his frustrated outburst outside coronavirus consulate in Sydney.
I take another look at the flyer for the Wake Up Australia rally, and it doesn't seem to be about China at all. And in fact, I've seen advertisements for the same event, and they say it's actually a 5G protest, or an anti-vaccination rally. What is going on here? So I'm going to go along myself to see if Nick Folkes rocks up, and if he does, to ask him what he's doing here. And that's what brings me to that rally at Hyde Park, Sydney. But when I get there, what I find is not exactly what I had expected. looking around, there's a real mix of people here. You've got elderly people, you've got families pushing prams, you've got young kids. It is a hodgepodge of people, a hodgepodge of causes. And as I walk around, I spot him. We've spotted in the crowd Nick Folks. He's standing in the distance in a blue shirt and glasses. My name's Mario. I'm with the agency.
On the placard here, I've got, "Hey China, stop bullying my country." And there's nothing wrong with standing up for your country.
We've seen a number of incidents of physical violence against Asian Australians. Do you worry that sending that message out and people gathering like this, you know, potentially voicing their anti-China views, might result in real, actual physical violence out there in the world when people sort of start to believe these ideas?
Well, I'm not responsible for other people's behaviour, and if people do that, then that's not the right thing. And if these Chinese in Australia take it personally, well, it shows you what side they're on. They're not on Australia's side, you know.
So I ask him whether being here is just part of some recruitment drive. It strikes me that there is a large group of frustrated, angry people for a variety of reasons against COVID-19.
Yes.
And you've got sort of anti-China posters on there. Yes. Is this an opportunity to perhaps co-opt them into this cause, into the anti-China cause?
Not really, no. And again, I'm not really responsible for how they see things and if they do cross over. But I do hope that people do.
Far-right ideas are on the rise in Australia, and they're well and truly on the radar of Australia's intelligence agencies. In fact, earlier this year, Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, gave a stark warning about the threat posed by right-wing extremists.
Right-wing extremism has been in ASIO sites for some time, but obviously the threat came into sharp, terrible focus last year in New Zealand. In suburbs around Australia, small cells meet regularly, salute Nazi flags, inspect weapons, train in combat and share their hateful ideology. These groups are more organised and security conscious than they were in previous years.
But has this gotten worse during COVID-19? Well, the answer might be in a threat assessment ASIO emailed last month to security professionals. It's marked sensitive and includes details of its investigation so far into right-wing extremists during COVID-19.
An extreme right-wing attack in Australia is plausible. The potential reach of right-wing rhetoric is increased by an unprecedented home-based audience pushed online by COVID-19 social isolation. We judge that the new propaganda will continue to exploit international COVID-19 attention and aim to garner and retain followers, and old releases will circulate online indefinitely. We assess the COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced an extreme right-wing belief in the inevitability of societal collapse and a race war.
The agency also says far-right extremists are now the subjects of around a third of all domestic ASIO investigations, the second largest group behind Sunni extremism, and that Queensland and Victoria have the highest number. And it's not just ASIO paying attention to this phenomenon. We also got our hands on a WA police memo dated last month. It says this.
Social media posts, particularly from the more extreme right-wing groups, continue to reflect an anti-China narrative.
The innocent child who may grow into an extremist adult really lives in our community.
Chin Tan is the race commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission, and he's worried too.
Well, there's no question that taking strong action against racism helps support efforts to combat racist extremism. So if we fail to do that, it becomes more likely that we will see increasing levels of racist extremism in our community.
Since COVID-19, he has contacted the government asking them to fund a strategy to address and measure racism nationally. Australia did have a strategy, but it was defunded in 2015. He says this is not just about stopping and measuring racism, it's about potentially stopping the next generation of extremists.
If racism is not addressed and creates an environment where organized racist extremism may gain a foothold and find expression. So for me, in a very personal sense, that beast that is racist extremism does not materialize overnight and from nowhere. I mean, it is bred, grows, and nurtured in places where racism and hatred exist.
Attorney General Christian Porter told us he's deeply concerned by reports of racial abuse and that the government has significantly increased its engagement with multicultural communities during the coronavirus pandemic. He said the Human Rights Commission's application will be considered through the usual budgetary processes. Okay, so I had to try the bubble tea for myself. I'm here with Rosa, the woman who got abused on her way to this bubble tea shop. Today, she's helping to, well, educate me.
It literally just tastes like tea, English breakfast, with milk in it and a lot of sugar. So the tapioca pearls, they're very chewy. They're very fun to chew while you're drinking it.
It's chewy. It's like a tea-flavoured sort of custardy dessert.
Yes.
We take a seat in the cafe, and she mentions that she got a call from the police about her attack.
So yesterday I got a call from the constable that was dealing with my case. The main offender, she did say that she didn't get much, and she was like, "It's unfortunate," and I'm really disappointed in what the decision was. So she's basically on a 12-month probation period under supervision of juvenile justice. And then she also said that she has to do an anger management course as well.
What do you think about that?
I think that it's bullshit, to be honest.
I tell her about what I found, the extremists and racists online, and the groups using COVID-19 to push their ideas.
I'm scared for the Asian community in Australia because those extremist groups, I know that they exist. I've seen some groups on Facebook, for example. So with the extremist groups and people that are a lot more serious about this, that worries me. And it worries me in terms of what are my children going to have to encounter when they're older? If they look a certain way, are they going to get bullied for it?
We wander out of the shop and onto the street, sipping our bubble tea. She says she's changed since the attack. She's been living here for years, but these days, and in fact ever since Corona, things are different. She doesn't feel as safe.
So it's funny because even like this morning when I was meeting you, I had to walk down this way, and it felt a little bit different. You definitely feel like you have more eyes on you when you're walking down the street, or if you're walking in a shopping centre or in a supermarket. You have more attention on you, like you sort of stick out a bit more than usual because of what you look like.
Background briefing sound producers Alila Schunner and Ingrid Wagner. Sound engineering by Simon Branthwaite. Supervising producer is Alex Mann. Additional research by Catherine Gregory. And our executive producer is Alice Brennan. I'm Mario Christodoulou.
Okay, well, that wasn't particularly cheerful, but it was informative. Australia's right-wing racist terrorists currently attract 30% of the resources of all ASIO, as devoted to surveilling the society, looking for people who are likely to go bang in the same way that random kernels of popcorn are likely to go snap, crackle and pop when you put the saucepan with a little bit of oil in the bottom of it over the gas burner, wait till the oil heats up, add your popcorn, put the lid on it, set it there. You don't know which one of those kernels is going to be the first one to pop off. And Australia has been relatively successful in exporting all kinds of terrorists. Like there was an Australian went to New Zealand because they had much more relaxed gun laws. And he went over there and he got a hold of semi-automatic military-style weapons, and the Christchurch massacre is what he did. Comes from about 100 miles to the east of here, as the crow flies. Such people exist. They'll go and live in another country if you can buy a gun there easier, so that you can then defend Australia against the threat of Muslims as perceived by the lunatic who thinks that's a clever idea. It always puzzles, bewilders, baffles and bedazzles me that the people who are most vociferous in favour of suppressing some other race, religion or creed, every one of them, and it doesn't matter what their own race, religion or creed is that they're defending, they all state that their personal race, religion, creed, even colour is superior, that the creator God of the entire universe chooses them as the chosen race, as the Judeo-Christ Islamics like to say, because, you know, the Christians are a breakaway, splinter, schismatic bunch of Jews, and the Islamics, they're basically another Abrahamic religion with another prophet who said, you know, like, stand on the shoulders of everybody who's gone before me. You've got to look at all of the other prophets who've gone before, from Abraham right on down to, and then this is what I have to say on top of that, you know. So technically, Muhammad bound all of his followers to pay attention to Christ and John the Baptist and Moses, all of the prophets going right back to the very start of Judaism. And that's just a theological fact. But there are these people who like to think that because they are descended from Europeans who practiced a Middle Eastern religion called Christianity or Judaism, therefore they have to try and live their whole life right now in a kind of recreation of the Crusades, squabbling over possession of the Holy Land, or whatever the hell it was that they thought they were doing back then, there, in the olden days. Maybe we should spell days with a D-A-Y-Z-E, because they were like, most of them wouldn't drink water because of the risk of getting gastroenteritis and dying from diarrhea. So they were generally drinking something that had been fermented, brewed, had an alcohol content of like 3 to 10%. So they were pissed most of the time. Now, European history is the history of a bunch of greedy, self-centered, hubristic, arrogant drunks. Inbred drunks, actually, if you look at the rulers of it. Yeah, so anyway, that's what the Neo-Vikings, and around here in, you know, the area around Glen Innes, there's a whole bunch of people who are like Scottish heritage and Irish heritage and Celtic heritage fantasists. For 25 years, they called Glen Innes Celtic country, pretending in their little heart of hearts that there were more Celts here than there are anywhere else in Australia. When the Celts ran away from the great British Islands, it was like after the Battle of Culloden and during the Irish clearances and the Scottish Highland clearances, they were running away because the Celts had been replaced by sheep. If the laird of the clan was able to get thousands of sheep adjusted, he could make more money from 50 sheep than he could of each peasant living a traditional lifestyle. So the clan chiefs in the Highlands sent their own taxmen, TACKS men. They were the people who used to collect the tithes and the rent on the land that the clan chief owned for the whole clan. And if you didn't pay your tithes, they could pull your roof down and burn your roof beam. And if they burned your roof beam, you were up shit creek, because there hadn't been any trees that big grown in Scotland for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. After the Battle of Culloden, the clan chiefs were given personal title to all of that land. They didn't own it collectively for everybody in the clan. They owned it personally for themselves. So yeah, they turfed off all of their clansmen and had them replaced by sheep, adjusted for English busyness men. And that's what happened. That's why the Scots went away to Canada, to America, to New Zealand, to Australia, to Rhodesia, to South Africa, to Hong Kong. Scotsmen, India, they went everywhere in the British Empire or the English-speaking world, because they'd been run off their own homeland because they'd been economically out-evolved by a sheep. Out-evolved by a sheep in economic terms. And, you know, like here, in this area, when sheep ceased to be a path to riches, the local Chamber of Commerce decided we need to tap into something else, and they decided tourism was the thing. So we built a sort of a miniature faux version of a stone circle set in concrete, blasting, well, actually drill holes and expansionite holes all over the damn things. Nothing got dressed. It's the most disrespectful caricature of a megalithic stone site that I've ever beheld in my whole life anywhere on anything. There's a fella in, I think it's Florida, but it might be Texas. Let's go with Florida because it's flat. He's got an airfield over there, and he's got a fiberglass replica of Stonehenge. And he charges people to go to his place at Stonehenge, and they stand in front of his painted fiberglass replicas of Stonehenge, and he flies around behind them very low to the ground so they can get pictures of themselves or just pictures of him doing it in a World War II vintage perfectly restored Spitfire. People have done replicas of Stonehenge all over the world with more taste than what we did here. And for 25 years, we called ourselves Celtic Country as a marketing gimmick, and it failed. So now we are Glen Innes Highlands. Yesterday, I was in the Glen Innes Highlands, and I visited a busyness man with whom I went to primary school. And he got a phone call from another Glen Innes busyness man, and because busyness man number one knows that I'm a greenie, and a polite one at that, he put his mobile phone on a speakerphone, and he had his conversation with the other Glen Innes busyness man who didn't know I was listening. And they discussed various things, including the idea that the death of that American fella, George Floyd, we should never have heard of that. They didn't think it was news. That was just... And the other Glen Innes busyness man, the one on the other end of the speaker, he told a joke. He said that his missus had bought him a George Floyd t-shirt, but he had to send it back because it was too tight in the neck. And busyness man number one, yeah, he laughed at that. They passed various opinions on the medical prognosis of anybody who complains of a bad back. I've been getting a pension for a bad back since 1986. Their theory is that it's going to kill you with cancer. You know, like within months, you start complaining of having a bad back, and you've had it. It's not old age. You're on your one foot in the grave, the other foot on the banana peel. So that was kind of funny. And their theory on the bloke who was asleep in his car at the Wendy's in the drive-through, who was being arrested and handcuffed for failing a breath test. I mean, like, you don't generally get handcuffed and taken off to the police station here in Oz if you fail a breath test. You know, you get issued with some paperwork on the side of the road, and in these modern times, you use a mobile phone to call somebody else to come and drive your car home for you. And then you're released on your own recognisance to show up at court to answer the charges or pay the fine. But over there in the excited status of Norte Armed Americano, They were handcuffing this bloke, and he's been roused from, okay, he's dozed off, he's drunk, he shouldn't have been driving, boo-hoo, sob, sob. He didn't hurt anybody, he drove until he stopped, and then he didn't have anything to concentrate on, so he fell asleep. So then he's decided, holy shit, like these are the cops who kill people, I'd better, it's a fight or flight response. So as he starts to struggle, one of them says, I'm going to tase you, and he got warned a couple of times, and then he grabbed a hold of the taser, and he grabbed the taser. And the funny thing about those tasers is they have to project two little metal darts. Each one trails a spool of wire behind it. The wire has got a very thin layer of plastic sprayed on it, so it's actually insulated wire, so that the hand unit can deliver the high voltage, low amperage shock that's going to paralyze the person on the other side. That's what a taser is, and they have a limited range of about, like 12 feet, sort of 3.5 meters kind of thing. So what this bloke does is he grabs a hold of the taser and he runs out past the distance that a taser is going to be effective, and he points it at the police. And then they pull their guns out at him, and he turns and he starts running away, and then they shoot him in the back. And these two local busyness men discuss among themselves how he hit those cops with the taser, and that's not necessarily a bloody, a safe thing to be hit with. It kills people. So apparently when a police officer uses a taser, it's a non-lethal device as defined by the law, and that's why cops never get charged when anybody dies after they use a taser on them, no matter how many times. I think there was a Brazilian died like that in George Street in Sydney not so very long ago. But however, if somebody grabs a hold of the policeman's taser and backs off out of range of it and points it at the policeman, then that's worth shooting them in the back for, as they run away when they see you draw your gun. And that's where some minds are genuinely at in the community that I live within. And I was being shown that, right, by someone I do business with on a regular basis. And he'd previously mentioned that he hoped I hadn't been protesting for Black Lives Matter, and I said, I haven't actually been protesting for anything. And when we got to the end of that little discussion, I said to this fella, actually, you forgot there's a third mob of protesters. It's not just the people in Sydney who are protesting for Black Lives Matter and the people who are protesting for refugees' rights. You forgot to mention the English fascists who are fighting with the London police on the streets, giving Hitler salutes while they defend Winston Churchill because he was such a racist that he condemned somewhere between 9 million and 19 million British subjects to die in a famine, which he caused by taking away the ships that used to carry the Indian grain harvest from the west coast of the country around Bombay, all the way around the pointy bit that pokes out into the Indian Ocean and around to Bengal, where all the Indian textile and cloth workers that were sort of bred up there by Clive of India, the British hero who started the British Raj, where they all lived. So when Churchill took away the boats that used to carry the grain, somewhere between 9 and 19 million Indians starved because they were British subjects, and Churchill was the Prime Minister of England who ran the British Empire, and he just thought they were shit underfoot. And that's kind of why people reckon he was a racist. So all of the English right-wing white supremacist fascists took to the streets hoping to beat up some Black Lives Matter protesters, and all they found was Winston Churchill's statue boarded up with plywood, surrounded by rings and rings of police. So they got drunk and had a fight with the police instead. Somebody attacked with graffiti John Howard's statue, he of the Northern Territory Intervention, which alleged that Aboriginal children were being prostituted to truck drivers up and down the territory. And he sent the army, he literally deployed the military forces against Australian citizens for political purposes, because in all of the time since he did that, no person has ever been convicted of doing what his publicity campaign sold the idea on the basis of what was happening at the time. Here in Australia, yeah, in 29 years, 432, I think, Aborigines have died in custody since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, and no Australian police officer has been charged. Has been convicted. There was one or two who did get charged, but they got let off. I can see why people want to go out there despite Corona and protest about the Black Lives Matter issue in America, because Black lives in custody are at risk here. I still say that around here there's only been 2 stories in 40 years where a local policeman is supposed to have killed a local teenager. One of those stories was total bullshit, but both of those stories, it was white policemen and white teenagers. There haven't been any stories around here that I'm aware of, and I keep my ear kind of well to the ground, pay attention to that sort of shit. No stories of a white policeman killing any blackfellas around here. So I must live in a sheltered little bubble, so far from the bright lights of the coast and the capital cities, that things aren't that bad here yet, I guess. It's always been like that. I grew up in a social black hole where time moves more slowly and bad ideas take longer to filter in. But by listening to ABC Radio National, I do get brought up to date with what's going on in the great cities of this country. I have no idea why these people want to delude themselves with the theory that they're any kind of a superior culture, when you consider that since they've come here 250 years, 1 month and 17 years ago, everything they've touched has turned to shit. They caught all the fish in the estuary. They fed the food plants to their livestock. They cut down all the trees and shut off the rainfall pump. They put the topsoil at the bottom of the rivers as they were catching all the fish in the rivers, and then they discovered gold, and they dug up all of the bloody ground beside the rivers and put the topsoil into the rivers, except the bit that washed out into the ocean, or the stuff that blew away. They clear-filled and continued to bugger up the rainfall. They irrigated, therefore they salinated, thus they desertified and devastated. It's a fair call to say that everything they've touched in 250 years, they've turned to shit. And these Euro-peon white supremacist right-wingers, Neo-Fascists, they feel like they're being threatened by Asians because their way of life doesn't work, because their ancestors have already destroyed or over-harvested and consumed every environmental surplus that used to live here. Whether it lived here in the form of ore in the ground, trees growing out of the ground, topsoil that you could grow things in, wildlife that you could harvest. Once upon a time, there was a home cottage industry around here in carving emu eggs. Last time I saw a wild emu was 1963. Running along beside the car, like at 30 mile an hour, and it went for a couple of paddocks going over the fences. But because there's no emus, there's no quandongs. No quandongs, no quandong jam. Because a quandong seed's got to go through an emu's alimentary canal before it will germinate. The kind of things that we have done for short-term gain since the whitefellas come here, we'll do this and send that to market and make a heap of money, and, for a couple of months we'll be fine. Then we'll go out and make a mess of something else. It's absolutely mind-buggering. And there are people who just don't understand why some individuals figure, oh, well, bugger it. Might as well go out and be counted in the street wearing a mask a couple of metres apart from everybody else, chanting to me mask, make me point, have me say, as sit at home, resigned to the fact that there's not much you can do about it. This is the situation. 8 billion people have decided that what they want to do is continue to grow the economy. They consider that the coronavirus is a temporary situation and they plan on getting back to normal and resuming economic growth, not only at the old rate, but fast enough to recover the gap in their profit forecast for their busyness plan that they committed themselves to 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. There are people my age and a bit older who are planning on working flat out really hard for another 5 or 6 years or so. I'm 59, so that they can retire at 65 and then be paid 50 to 80% of whatever wages or salary they are getting when they retire, and then have that indexed to inflation because of the economic growth that they expect their grandchildren's generation to produce for them from a world that's been flogged to death since they left school and started looking for a job when profit margins were higher all over the place, because you can't have any economic activity unless there's a pre-existing environmental surplus which can be over-harvested and exploited. And every environmental surplus on the planet has already been over-harvested and exploited. That's what went wrong in 2009. When all of a sudden nobody could make any more money by buying extra oil or extra coal and burning it. House of cards fell down. By printing money, propping up the banks, the whole thing was made to sit up and run for another 10 years. And now the Bat Eaters Lament virus has decided to stop the economy, the global vile ages economy, in its tracks. And that's what's happening. It's happening right now, all around us. You can see it. All the steam, all the momentum has gone out of the economy. Nobody's got any resources left to splurge with. The airline transport industry and the tourism industry is desperate to ignore the medical, virological, epidemiological facts of how the virus works, because all they're fixating on is the fact that if we observe the necessary medical precautions, the barrier nursing precautions effectively, and reverse barrier nursing, because you don't know who you're going to infect, so you better wear a mask. You don't know who's going to infect you, so you better wear a mask. It's a both ways thing. The politicians and the economists and the Chamber of Commerce, they're not interested in observing or paying attention to any of that because they want cash turnover now. In England, there's a political demand to reduce the interpersonal separation distance by 50%. I'm sure the fascists, the right-wingers, the white supremacists, they'll be in favour of that because it's a Chinese virus and it won't attack the Europeans, will it? Eh? But in fact, the virus seems to attack old, fat, sick people, particularly men. And European civilizations have lots of them. Geriatrics whose life has been already prolonged and extended by miracles of modern medicine. They're the people, and I'm one of them, whose lives are threatened most by coronavirus. And these clowns want to play games about harassing the Chinaman. I'm really surprised that the ABC Radio National Network was permitted to broadcast this particular program, because right at the moment, the Australian universities are shitting blue lights because Beijing has warned all its students not to come to Australia because there's a risk of anti-Chinese sentiment and being racially harassed in Australia. And that program demonstrated that the mandarins of Beijing have got apparent reason to warn their students. Maybe the reason they warn their students is because the mandarins of Beijing are paying attention to Australia's social media, and they knew about all this shit at the same time, or perhaps before ASIO got their fingers out of their fundamental orifices, at least at the level of the elbow joint. Anyway, Warble's on a lot to YouTube. Such is life. White supremacist, racist terrorists in Australia. Ciao.